What do you get when you are something of a nerd and you are approached by a fellow nerd and the both of you are card slingers, but not card slingers in the Kenny Rogers, you gotta know when to hold them, when to fold them kind of way? We're building a Magic the Gathering body today, and I am super stoked. More specifically, we are building a body that is based around the Mythic icon, the Mythic Rarity icon that comes on some Mythic Rare Magic the Gathering cards. And it really is that nerdy and that cool. So let me give you a little bit of an introduction. Welcome back, everybody, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to MadLad Instruments. My name is Drew. I build guitars in my garage and basses, and I take you along for all the shenanigans along the way. So that's really the story. That's how it came to be. I had a young lad, a young mad lad, a young gentleman by the name of Craig approach me on Reverb, shoot me a message and says, and we went back and forth a little bit talking about finishing and different ideas, but the idea that he came up with is like, hey, could you potentially do a burst that's based on the Mythic Rarity icon on a Magic the Gathering card? And after the obligatory exchange and talking about various aspects of Magic the Gathering, as nerds do, I said, yeah, absolutely, I would love to take on a project like this. And what ensued is basically a month and a half of shenanigans. This video was shot over, like I said, a month and a half, so there's some continuity errors, there's some jumping back and forth. There's also a side quest in there where I got another video out of it, so there's going to be a couple wardrobe changes, maybe potentially a haircut. I hope that you'll be on the lookout for all these fun little continuity errors, because I'm sure they are many. But without further ado, let's just jump right in. I'm going to send you over to Drew, who's in his cozy spider thermal, and he's going to tell you a little bit more. So take it away, Drew. Alrighty, so to kick things off, Habamus Corpus. Shoutouts to Migisha Jarnigan, my high school Latin teacher. She was the GOAT. 3 years of high school Latin, a lot of shenanigans, so glad I get to break it out every once in a while. But yeah, we got this really rad body, came off of CNC, got a ton of green lines, and maybe a little bit of burnout on the ferro holes. I realized I didn't set my offsets high enough, and so the spindle kind of just plowed into it and caused a little bit of friction burn, but should be able to work this out with some sanding. It's just going to be where the ferrules are anyway, so you want a little bit of a recess or a little bit of an inset there, so should be good. We are going to start by grain staining this, and grain staining or grain filling with a colored filling is something that I have gotten a lot of praise for. People really like my grain stained bodies, and again, very thankful for that. We're going to do something really rad and out of left field on this one though, because we're going to be staining it red. I normally do clear or black grain filler to make it pop, but I think with the Mythic Burst that we are going to be cooking up, me and Craig were talking about it and we thought that red was going to give it a really nice pop, so gonna be doing a red filler on this. We're going to jump a little bit ahead in time though, because I'm actually making 2 videos out of this, getting maximum video or clicks per project here, but I'm actually making a tutorial video on how I do my grain stain and the products that I use and everything like that, so that will be right here. So if you want to watch the full process of me grain staining it, just pop it open a different tab. This is kind of like an alternate timeline, or like, I don't know, it is a story or a movie or a piece of content that is happening at the same time as the main content, so basically like a side quest. So if you want to go fill out the side quest, do that here. But if you want to kit with the MSQ, we are just going to jump ahead in time to where this is grain stained, and you gotta love jump cuts. So here is the grain stained body with the nice red grain stain on it. If you want to check out how this body came to be and a full tutorial on how to do grain staining, click this video right here in the upper right, and or wherever YouTube is putting it now these days. Right now, at time of recording, it's in the upper right. But yeah, we have our grain stain. This is going to be a really cool effect underneath the finish. And now we can actually talk about the finish that we're going to be doing, and that is Mythic Red Burst. It is so called because it is built off of the back of the Mythic icon that comes on a Magic the Gathering card. So Craig, my client who ordered this, said, hey, could you do a guitar that, you know, has a kind of fade like on a Mythic Magic the Gathering card? And being the fellow card slinger that I am, I'm like, that is super rad, let's do it. So I'm actually going to print out the reference image that he sent me, and I'm going to show you guys how I do color matching and how we're going to cook up the color and what we're going to be spraying on this to get the effect that we're going for. So let's take a look at that now. Okay, so here is the reference image that we are going to be using, and I haven't played Magic the Gathering in a little bit, so I don't know what set this is. Feel free to leave it down in the comments. And also let me know what your favorite Planeswalker is. But what I'm looking for when I look at like a reference image like this is I'm really looking to just kind of map out the number of colors that we have here. So obviously there's the black border, we're not going to be doing that, but here in the middle, as you can see, there's kind of this almost lighter orange creamsicle looking color. So I'm probably going to start with that, and then it just gradually gets darker. So this is like a darker orange, almost like a burnt umber, and then we have like a reddish color out here on the edge. So 1, 2, 3. And that's what I'm going to be aiming for when I mix my colors. And if you're ready for your chemistry lesson for the day, here's how we're going to do that. So I have here varethane polyurethane. This is a water-based polyurethane. Very, very important that it is water-based. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. I have 3 paint cups here, the tops that go on those, and each one of these is really, really cool. You can get these on Amazon, but these actually have like a mesh filter on them. I think this is like a 2-micron filter or something like that. And so they'll filter out like debris and stuff like that. So you can mix your color in the actual cup, mix it up, and then just pour it into your spray gun, and it'll automatically filter it. So you don't need to use an external filter, which is really, really neat. Now, the reason that it needs to be a water-based polyurethane is because we are going to be using gel stains, specifically corn spit. If you watched the grain staining tutorial video, you'll recognize these because they're super duper ubiquitous. These are gel stains or gel dyes. You can also use like trans tint or mix-all dyes. I've used those in the past. They've been very, very successful, but I like unicorn spit because it's on the cheaper side. You can get it readily at like Michael's or your favorite hobby store, but these are water-based. You need to mix common bases. So you have a water-based poly, and then you have water-based gels. If you tried to use like a oil-based poly, then water and oil don't mix. So that's not gonna play nice. And Varethane, I really, really like their stuff. I will show you another product that I used of theirs in the past. So this is triple thick polyurethane. So this is basically a thicker mix of this stuff. It's like a 3-to-1 ratio almost, or they claim that 1 coat of this is about 3 coats of this. And it's also self-leveling. That's the reason that I bought it originally. The only thing is that it is so thick that I can't spray it through my HVLP gun. It gets a little bit cloggy, I guess you can say. So if you're going to use this, apply it using a foam brush. It's really, really easy. You can find these at your hardware store as well. You can put them down. This sands up really, really nice. So when you actually put down a couple coats, since it's thicker, it will take progressive sanding a lot easier, and it'll clean up and polish up a lot better. So this would be my recommendation if you're wanting to do like a hand rubbed poly finish, or you really just like, you know, the therapeutic process of painting. But I have an HVLP setup, and so high volume, low pressure HVLP. It's basically a spray gun or like a paint gun that runs on an air compressor. We'll take a look at that in a second. But in order to have that, it is very particular about the thickness of the product. And so we're going to be using this stuff. We're going to use the thinner stuff, and we're going to mix it up. Now, the other caveat, or the other thing that I really enjoy about water-based poly, is that it's much easier to clean up. You can clean your guns and your equipment with soapy water, whereas if you're using like nitro, you have to use solvents and acetone and stuff like that, and it can be rather nasty, on top of nitro already being a pretty nasty and carcinogenic chemical. So water-based poly, I've been using this for a little bit. It creates an amazing finish, and it's a lot easier to work with, very beginner friendly. And so that's why I recommend it. So I also used Minwax polyacrylic in the past, but it hasn't been the most consistent. And once I moved over to Varethane, it was just a lot easier. So this is the stuff that I'm currently using. It could be subject to change though, so definitely be on the lookout. I'm always looking to improve my process, and so we may be looking at something a little bit different down the road. But for now, Varethane is it. So let's get to mixing, and let's take a look at that. Alrighty, so when it comes to mixing actual colors, there's a lot of tricks that you can use to work smarter and not harder. Remember, we are doing a fade, so normally you would be like, oh man, I have to mix 3 different colors to do a sunburst or like a 3-tone burst. You actually don't. You can mix up a lot of your base color. So in this case, we're going to be doing this middle kind of creamsicle color. I'm going to do a big old batch of that, so maybe about half of this of that. Mix it all up. And then remember that these are just darker values of this. And so what we can do is once we mix that big old batch, we pour a third of it into this one and a third of it into that one. And then basically half the work is already done. And then we just have to value match the other 2 to the colors that we have right here. And that's just as easy as adding a little bit more red, mixing it up, and doing that. So work smarter, not harder. Oh, another tip, if you are actually using nitro and you're going to be spraying, Driftwood Guitars has a really great 3-tone sunburst tutorial video. I will link it down below and put a little card right here. But he actually mixes it in the actual can, or like the spray gun. So you can put your nitro in, spray your first coat, then just darken it, and he does it like on the fly, which is really, really cool and requires a little bit more skill than I'm inclined to try at the moment, but that's another option that you have as well. Nitro does mix a little bit easier with dyes if you have an oil-based dye and stuff like that. So that's another option, but I don't want to do it on the fly. I also want to be able to replicate the color later down the road if I want to, you know, make this. I will be making this available on the reverb shop, so I'll need to remember like what values I used, and having leftover finish or leftover poly that I can then take off the shelf and spray the next one on. That would be really, really rad. So let's get to mixing. Alrighty, here we are, ready to spray. We've got our body mounted up. The lollipop, as I like to call it, this little metal bar right here, this is a super duper cheap solution. Just goes to show you that you don't need a whole lot to spray guitars. And this is literally 1/4 inch EMF tubing that you can get. It's what they use to route like electrical leads and receptacles and stuff like that. So the metal pipes that you see in building ceilings and stuff like that, you can get like 10 feet of it for 10-15 bucks at Home Depot. Chop them down, drill a couple holes in them, and you got yourself a lollipop stick that you just drill into the neck pocket. They make ones that also like work with the actual Fender spec neck holes, but if you're spraying a bunch of different body sizes like Stratocasters and P basses and stuff like that, it sometimes is better to have the middle one here. Just make sure you use screws that don't go all the way through the body, otherwise they're going to punch through the back. But this is going to be hidden by the neck pocket, or the neck, once it gets seated in there, and I haven't heard anybody complain to me about the holes being there, so we are good to go. Only other thing that I'm going to do here, I've got my HVLP gun set up. This is just a $50 special that I got from Home Depot. Got the compressor on about 25 PSI. Again, we're using very, very low pressure here. 25 is sometimes even pushing it, depending on who you ask, but I'm not the guy to ask about HVLP like pressures and stuff like that. It is really dependent on your gun and your compressor and your relative skill, of which I am still learning a lot about spraying guitars with HVLP setups. Spray cans or rattle cans also offer a really, really great finish. I'm going to be having a video coming out soon that'll show you what you can do with a rattle can finish if you're on a, you know, kind of a one-off budget, or you're not fully invested into a HVLP setup. That's totally cool. You can do a lot of cool stuff with the rattle cans. So I'm going to tack cloth this. I've got some tack cloth. Tack cloth is just, let me go grab it real quick actually. Where did it go? Where's my tack cloth? There it is. So this is a tack cloth. It's just a bit of cheesecloth with some beeswax on it that you can use to pick up debris and stuff like that. Mine was a little bit dirty, but the cool thing is you can just fold it over itself and it gets a little bit darker, or lighter, or less debris and stuff like that. So you just fold over itself and you just run it over here. It'll pick up any dirt, particulates, debris, stuff that's going to get trapped underneath the finish if you don't. So we're just going to go through once more, and we are going to clean that all up. Next, I'm going to grab my color and just like filter it into the spray bottle, and then we're going to spray our first coat. The first coat's going to be really, really light. It's just called a tack coat. It's basically just putting a little bit of finish down so that the rest of the finish has something to grab onto. So we will put our tack coat down. It'll probably be about 10-15 minutes to let that flash off, and we'll come do a second pass of that. And then from there, we're just building up color, and we will actually feather out. Alrighty, here we are for round number 2. Also, bear with me, the laser engraver is running in the background. It's got the compressor on, so if it's a little loud, please forgive me. But we've got all of our base yellow coat down. It's looking very mustard and yellow, mustard and ketchup yellow and red. So we want to add some orange in here. And it's time to talk a little bit about theory. And when it comes to, I'm grabbing my tack cloth here because I see some particulates that need to be eradicated. We can chat here while we're eradicating particulates. So, when it comes to spraying a sunburst, there's a couple different schools of thought. If you're doing really, really authentic and you're doing like a 2-tone or a 3-tone Fender style sunburst, there are some that allege back in the day that Fender would spray the base color, then they'd spray the heavy color, the darkest color on the edge, and then you kind of feather in the middle color towards the middle. But I have always kind of kept it simple. KISS, keep it simple, and you know the last part. So with me, it's just going lightest to darkest. It's also, like I said, if you're doing the Driftwood method where you're mixing your nitros or your finish in the cup on the fly, going from light to dark back to like a middle tone would be a little bit more difficult. So yeah, just so you know, there's a couple different ways you can spray a sunburst, but we're going to be doing lightest to darkest. So we're going to go around with our orange next, and we're going to feather it around the edge here. And I've had to run my gun at a little bit higher pressure just because the stuff is a little bit more viscous, or this poly is a little bit more viscous. Usually spray guns like to have a consistency around like a milky thickness, so just a little bit thicker than water, but not so thick that it's like something more thick than water. I can't think of something relative. So higher PSI, one thing you can do if you're running at a higher PSI and you don't want to spray, there's a bunch of different controls on your spray gun. This one in particular measures how much paint is coming in from the can into the actual nozzle. So if you're running at a higher PSI because you need to, because the stuff is more viscous, and you don't want to lower your PSI because you're going to lose like aerosolization, just tweak this a little bit. So I'm going to have to tweak it just a little bit, but once we get it dialed in, we're going to feather in that orange along the edge here, and we will get that second part. I'm going to go pretty heavy on it because in the actual picture, you'll remember that the yellow part is just kind of the middle one. So really looking to put a lot of color down and maybe just have like a slight little middle glow. But for a more traditional sunburst or a 3-tone burst, it's usually about 70% bigger color, 20%, and then 10% just around the edge. If you can visualize it that way, that's just putting it into percentages, but you'll know it when you see it. And this takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of stuff. I've screwed up many a number of sunbursts, and so the good news is, although it is a little laborious, if you mess up, you can just sand it back to bare wood and try again. So it's just one of those things you get used to with working with your particular gun, your particular setup, and the particular materials you're using. But without a doubt, if you put your effort in, you'll be spraying awesome sunbursts in no time. Something else that was kind of confusing, so we've started the feathering process and it's starting to look good. We've got a nice little transition. The value of the orange wasn't too different from the yellow, so it may look pretty analogous or pretty much the same color, but trust when you're looking at it, there is a subtle difference, and it's really going to pop when we obviously do the red as well. But one question that kind of was weird to me when I was first starting out with shooting finishes is how much time do you take between coats? And I normally thought that you would have to give it like a whole hour or two for the finish to fully dry and everything like that. But then I started watching like auto painters and stuff like that, and they were spraying coats in between like 10 or 15 minute intervals, and I thought that was crazy. And so I've started, lessening the time. Really, the marker, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, is what's called flash time. So as you can see around here on the edges, there's some spots that are a little bit brighter because there's heavier amounts of finish there. It's wetter, for lack of a better word. And so what you're waiting for is for those areas to evaporate and dry up, because if you accumulate too much finish or you get it too wet, then it's going to start to run. So what's that process where it evaporates off is called flashing. And so every finish is going to have a certain amount of flash time. Now, every finish has a different flash time. It could be as little as a couple minutes. It could be as much as a couple hours. But typically with polyurethanes and varnishes and stuff like that, it's pretty quick. And again, not being too heavy with your coats, obviously taking multiple passes to build up the color and stuff like that. That was another big mistake that I would make a lot, was I wanted to put down as much color as possible. And when you put down too much color, you get it too wet and it starts to run. So being patient, allowing time, allow that flash time in between. Really just watch for those pockets where it's wet to dry up, and then you're good to do another pass. And so I'm going to do my next pass on this, and we're just going to continue to build up the color a little bit more, and then we'll come in for that final punch with the red, and I think it's going to look super sick. Alrighty, super stoked with how this came out. Sent pictures to Craig. He said he is completely over the moon, so not only do I love it, but the client loves it as well, so you can't ask for more than that. Now we're gonna get into top coat. Now, if you've watched any of my other finishing videos, you know that I'm a big fan of Varthane triple poly, and this can is still going strong. You may have heard him before, but when you are doing top coat, basically our goal is to get as flat a surface as possible. More flat means more shiny. And when we put down our poly, we're going to be using a foam brush here, which as you can see is probably going to leave some streaks. That's totally normal. But what we're going to do is we're going to put down a couple coats of this. We're going to ScotchBrite it back. ScotchBrite is just an abrasive pad, and so we use that to do our first initial level sand. It's a little bit more abrasive, and when I say abrasive, it's about 800 grit. So in terms of sanding grits, it's a little bit higher, but in terms of finish sanding, it is on the lower end. And then from there, 2 more coats, and then we're going to do a progressive sand from 1000 to 3000. And once that's done, we will polish it up, and it'll be nice and flat and nice and shiny. So that's the basic outline. That's how I've done finish in the past. If you guys have watched any of my other finishing videos, you know that this is the MO for now, and I'm constantly looking for updates and stuff like that. So if you guys see anything about my technique or areas that I could improve, then please do leave them in the comment down below. But that's what we're doing for now. So without further ado, we're just going to slather this on, and in the style of Bob Ross, just do some happy little painting here. I'm going to grab my tack cloth really quick and just go over it. This has been sitting inside in my house, so air controlled and pressure controlled, so it shouldn't have any major debris. Whoa, that would have been catastrophic. Okay, don't want to spill our can of poly everywhere. That would not be fun. But with that in mind, there shouldn't be too many particulates here, but never hurts to go over and just pick it up with a little bit of tack cloth. And thankfully with the grain fill, it looks like the grain fill went really nice on this one, so we aren't going to see too many pockets here. But one of my favorite parts about doing finishes like this is that there's just the littlest bit of peak of the grain that comes out even in the final finish. So there's going to be a nice little effect as you go over the grain lines. It's going to have a little bit of texture, which is really, really sick. So let's go ahead and get into it. And y'all know that I like to do these quiet, kind of take a moment style painting sections. So if you're wanting to see the rest of the video, go ahead and jump to the next chapter using the scrub bar down below. But if you want to sit here and yap with me for a little bit, more of a one-way yap, but we'll do that too. So got my big old brush, got a big old glob, which just wiped it up on the can, and we just go in and start covering. A little bit of ASMR here. Y'all know that the painting process is a bit of an ASMR, and just making sure I'm not picking up any tint or we're not streaking or anything. Doesn't look like it. Looks like it's good. Looks like there was a little bit of a, I think it's picking up just a little bit of the red here. So I'm going to be a little bit extra cautious with that. It doesn't appear to be streaking into the rest of it too bad, so it should be good there. This is one of the first coats, so there's a chance that it might pick up a little bit of the color, but if that's the case, just go a little bit lighter. I was being a little heavy-handed there now that I admit it, so 3 hairs and some air, as old Bob would say. I definitely... Bob Ross, who I'm referring to, by the way. You used to always have the saying, 3 hairs and some air when you're going really, really light. And around the edges here, we'll just kind of feather around and just kind of bring it around town. Again, not too much of a super precise science to it, very therapeutic. You just kind of go in. And already you can see the top coat starting to form here, and it's adding just a little bit of shine to it, which I really, really dig. And these little pockets here where there's a lot of globs, we'll come back and pick those up here. You don't want something too crazy, or you don't want a whole lot of finish pooling on the top areas because that will cause runs, but we will come back and touch those in a little bit. Then from the top, I just kind of come around here, go around the bottom edge here, and then we'll head to the back. Our lollipop is a little loose, but it's still holding up, so we should be good there. Get a little bit more here.
and we'll get into it. What do we want to talk about today? What's been on my mind? I've been reading or listening to The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. As a kendo practitioner, I do martial arts, and so I do judo and I do kendo. I just recently got into bogu in kendo. So bogu is the armor. If you've never seen kendo before, it's a very, very cool martial art. It's more of akin to Japanese fencing. They call it Japanese fencing, and I don't know if that's like to equate it with fencing necessarily, or just to like make it analogous, and so it's easier to be like, oh, it's like fencing but Japanese, and that like draws more people. But a lot of high-ranking sensei and high-ranking kendo people call it that, so I don't think it's diminutive to call it Japanese fencing. But anyway, Musashi is a revered figure, not just in martial arts and Japanese culture and everything, but especially amongst kendoka. Kendoka being people that practice kendo. So it's my first time reading it, but I know a lot of my friends who I do kendo with, and they've all read or listened to The Book of Five Rings. And the translation that I've been listening to says to come back to it every couple years or so and reread it just to make sure that it's fresh. And Musashi even references that in his own writings, where it's like, hey, you're not going to get this first time around. You need to practice, or think about this and practice this daily. One of the common retorts, and whenever Musashi drops a truth bomb, is like, think about this, or meditate on this, or practice this daily, or take this to heart, basically. So he's very fond of that turn of phrase in particular. So yeah, but the Book of Five Rings has been really, really cool. It's divided into 5 different books, or scrolls. They were scrolls, and each one of them talks about a particular topic, or there's some, like the water scroll, which is very, very focused on like very practical stuff, like here's your stance. Like it talks about Chudan no Kamae and Jodan no Kamae, which are 2 stances that we use in kendo. And then there's more ethereal, I guess you can say, or the translation that I'm using refers to it ethereal. Like the 5th scroll is ether, and it talks about some more, not nebulous things, but very like philosophical and very more existential, I guess you could say, things. But it's been good so far. So let me know down below if you've read The Book of Five Rings. It is a fantastic read. It's been used in business as much as martial arts, as much as just everyday life and living. It's pretty nifty. It's a nifty, nifty little book. And as you can see, I'm just kind of going over here, picking up these areas where there's a lot of pooling. So over here especially, you can see there's like, you kind of want to glaze the top of it like a cinnamon roll or something, like a baked good that you put glaze over the top of, but you don't want a whole lot of pool of finish on a particular area. You want to work those out, because those, if they're left to their own devices, will pool, and then they become bumps, and you have to sand those down, and it gets a little annoying. I've also loaded up a lot of finish on this particular brush, so I might grab another clean one here. This is a smaller brush. By the way, I'm just using these foam brushes that you can get at Lowe's for a couple bucks. And then this one will actually allow me to get into some tighter spaces and feather everything out. So, here, bring it around. And you want to maintain just about a regular direction here. Typically going in the direction of the grain is best practice. And you want to follow that direction through all your coats. So if whatever direction you choose to pick, whatever direction you decide on, just make sure that you're following that, because if you cross, sometimes the finish won't sit as level, and you're going to create a little bit more work for yourself. But that's not the worst thing in the world. If you like sanding, or sanding is a therapeutic process, then you can definitely overcome it. I really like this brush here because you can get into these edges around the bouts and kind of feather everything out here. But going back to the Book of Five Rings, the introduction for the particular translation that I am listening to talks a lot about like the myth of Musashi, I guess you can say. So as I understand it, the Book of Five Rings, the original transcript is lost to time. Like we don't have the original transcript that Musashi himself wrote. And so we're reliant on translations and basically secondhand sources that, were copies and stuff like that. And a lot of research has been put into authenticating and vindicating the sources that we have. So it makes you think about, other historical texts, and the first one that comes to mind is the Bible. And so as a Catholic, I'll make it at the outset clear that I am religious and I am a Catholic. Have been all my life, and it's a joyous opportunity to be Catholic, and it has done so many things. I do volunteer youth ministry at my church as well. So God has poured out so many blessings in my life, and it's nice to be able to be part of the Catholic Church and worship Him and give back in that way. But the discourse around Musashi and the Book of Five Rings and everything reminds me a lot of how can we be sure that the Bible is the true translation and the true divine inspired word of God and everything like that. And it gets into the realm of talking about skepticism and faith, and skepticism is a very, very good thing to have in any religious sort of basis. If you think about doubting Thomas, when Jesus was resurrected, he said, "Let me see the wounds. I need to touch the wounds." And they say doubting Thomas is this kind of pejorative almost term, but I think that's fantastic. There are some aspects of our faith that we need to take on faith. One of them being that Jesus was a man. He was fully God and fully man, and that he lived and he died for our sins and stuff like that. I wasn't there when that happened, so I need to kind of take that on faith. And to other issues of the magisterium and, the mysteries of our church and our faith, we need to take those on faith as well. So, yeah, it got me into thinking, and it kind of got me into this biblical sleuthing mode where I was thinking about the primary sources of the Bible and stuff like that too. And granted, I think we are a little bit closer to the primary sources of the Bible because the way in which the Bible was canonically written and stuff like that, you had oral tradition was transcribed, and then you had these sources, and then the sources were collected, collated, and canonized so that we now have the biblical canon and stuff. But we still have the original sources, and the original reference materials are, what are referred to and what are translated, whereas with the Book of Five Rings, it's more tricky because we don't have the original source material. So a long discussion to say that it's interesting, and I'm sure there's a word to describe what I'm getting at, the process of testing and researching sources and, tracing back the lineage to provide a source with credibility. But yeah, sometimes the message of what you're reading, the providence of the Bible is, pretty well researched, and granted, I'm not so versed. I need to do a little bit more reading in that regard, but even if you don't trust the provenance of the book, I don't think you necessarily need that to, live a good Christian life and stuff like that, because I believe that the Bible is the divine and inspired word of God, and it is revealed. God reveals His truth to us in time, because if He revealed it all at once, then our heads would explode. But with that in mind, the Bible is just one in many different ways that God reveals the truth and, gives us the grace and mercy that He poured out through His Son Jesus and all this stuff. I'm weaving together Catholic syllogisms here, bear with me, or, Catholic kind of talking points. But yeah, I don't think it's nice to know the provenance of the Bible, and I'm sure there's a lot more scholarship that kind of proves the provenance of the Bible. But even if you were completely ignorant to that, take the Bible at its value, and that the core value of the Bible is that it is the Word of God, and it teaches us to be good to one another and to love God and love our neighbor. Do you really need providence to prove that that is a good message and that you should follow it? If this were all made up and, it was a big, huge prank by somebody back in the day, these are the hard questions you need to ask as a faithful person. I used to be shying away from these questions, but once I started asking them, wisdom and some stuff started to pop out. But even if this was all a big prank and a bunch of dudes back in the time of Christ, back at 100 BC or whatever, it says, hey, let's play the longest con in human history and try and get somebody over with this book that we're writing. even if that were the case, do you think they would write a book that, taught you to be good and kind and loving? Or is it more likely that these people were divinely inspired or inspired by the amazing works of God made man, and they wanted to record it for the rest of human history, and that text has been sustained by the power of the Holy Spirit through generations? But again, going back to it, I don't think that if it was all a big prank that they would create such a magnanimous and magnanimous and altruistic. Like, the message wouldn't be, hey, love your neighbor and stuff like that. It would be like, hey, this, it would be a lot more worldly, I would think. So, yeah. And even if it wasn't a big prank, and even if it was like I said, even if it wasn't a big prank, or it was a prank, sorry, I'm mincing my words here, but if it was a prank and they wrote this divine book, or they wrote this book that tells you to be good to one another, and we all fell for it hook, line, and sinker, the worst thing that could happen from falling prey to that thing is that the world would be a better place, and that we would be loving and caring to one another if we followed the book at its word and didn't misinterpret it, or try and twist the passages in it to justify tearing people away from their homes and stuff like that. This is getting really political, but yeah, I don't think I need the providence of the Bible to realize that the message is good, and sometimes you don't need the providence of something to realize its value. So even if we don't, we got this all painted off, but I want to make my point here. I do believe that the Bible is the divine word of God, and it has been sustained through the ages, through the power of the Holy Spirit, because there's no way that a text could survive 2,000 years without some sort of divine intervention. But in case it wasn't, then if the message of that book, or that message of that questionable source, was just to love everybody and to be a good human being and leave the world in a better place than you found it, it can't be that bad. And I'm willing to fall hook, line, and sinker for that prank, if it is a prank, because it caused me to do a net good. So yeah, long, loquacious way to say that sometimes we don't need the providence of something to understand its value. So, especially not in the case of like sacred texts, and even in the case of like Musashi. So that took kind of a left turn. We started talking about the Book of Fire and Rings, and then we got into Christian theology. So, all right, we got this all glazed up. I'm going to meet you guys after we put our second coat down and we get to ScotchBriting. So we're going to give this about 2 hours. I think 2 hours is the cure time. We're going to let it cure up, and then we will go and get it ScotchBrited. So we'll see you then. S to the C to the O to the T to the C to the H. It is ScotchBrite time. So, in case you didn't know, this is a ScotchBrite pad. That's a brand name for just the generic name of abrasive pad. And this is basically about 800 grit, if you're using sandpaper numbers. And what we're going to do is, we've got our 2 coats of triple thick poly down, which is actually 6 coats. So if you're doing regular thickness poly, 6 is about your magic number. What we're going to do is we're going to go over, and I was talking about it I think a little bit earlier, but this is a trick that I picked up from Highline Guitars as well, so go give Chris some love over at Highline Guitars. And he basically has a couple different grains of ScotchBrite that he goes through. I do just the second. There's 4 different types of ScotchBrite, and this one is the second least abrasive. So there's one more that's softer than this, but this is the second softest or the second least abrasive, depending on glass half full, glass half empty, how you look at it. So with that in mind, what we're trying to achieve here is what's called level sanding. So right now, as you can see, we've got lots of different ridges in the finish. So there's lots of streaks and stuff like that. Wherever you see a streak, there's ruts. And a rut is just an area of like the finish is, there's like a valley and then there's 2 peaks and everything. If we want to get our finish to be super duper shiny, we're going to need it to be as level as possible, so that when we go to polish it, it cleans up all that stuff. Polishing will do a little bit of level, but not nearly as much as what we're going to be doing here. So what we're going to do is we are going to wet sand this. I've got my spray bottle of water. Just got to make sure that I label them correctly, because I have another one that has isopropyl alcohol in it, and I think that would still work, but I digress. Anyway, so we're going to just spray this down and kind of work it in circular patterns. You can follow the grain circular patterns. It doesn't really matter. I've seen it done a couple different ways, but if we want to be super duper consistent, you're really keen on making sure everything goes the same direction, then just go in the direction of the grain. But if you're going in other directions, that's okay too. So What we're going to be looking for is we're going to look for the finish to kind of take on like a milky, almost like smoky texture. It's kind of hard to describe, but you'll see it here in just a second. If you watched any of my other finish videos, you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard to see on lighter finishes because the lighter finishes, they're not as dark. And since the finish itself, the top coat is lighter, when it becomes smoky, it is hard to see. But on a dark body like this, it should pop out pretty prevalently. So without further ado, let's go ahead and spray. I'll show you what we're looking for here in just a second. You'll usually start to see it once the body starts to dry off or the water evaporates off. And another thing I'm checking is just making sure that I'm not picking up red, because this body has been kind of smearing red just a little bit here. I think that's because I didn't give the color coats enough time to really cure. So, not that I'm trying to speed run through this, but there's some colors and some lacquers that take longer to do full dry time. And you can still work wet on wet. You just have to be mindful of, again, color smearing and stuff like that. So just be very light with your passes like we were earlier when we were putting on the poly. And just check your brush regularly to make sure you're not picking up color and smearing it all over the place. But I think picking up a little bit of red and taking it across this body kind of gave the overall body just a little bit of extra reddish hue, and that looks kind of sick. So, yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world. So it's like Bob says, there's no mistakes, just happy accidents. So we just have a happy little accident. I think it just adds a little bit more glow to it too. So again, just working in the green, direction of the green, and working it up. Doesn't take too long. I'll maybe do like 5 or 10 passes, but you'll start to see that the finish will actually shine up a little bit, because as we're leveling off, we're also kind of buffing. And so as it levels off, it's just going to naturally get a little bit shinier. So that's really what I'm looking for, is just for a little bit of extra shine. And then as I'm going over, I'm looking for dry pockets, make sure that I'm going over everything equally and not leaving any kind of dry pockets behind. And that'll probably do this for the top coat here, or the top here. We'll flip over to the back, and as you can see, it's starting to get a little bit more reflective. That's exactly what we want to see. We're going to check the back there in just a second. Now here on the back, there was a little bit of bleed out, or there's some finish in the pocket here that kind of seeped out, and so I quickly kind of worked that back in, so there's a little bit of a groove here, but that's why we level sand. So we're going to work that right out. Don't have to focus on it necessarily. If you had one area, sorry, I said that in my throat there, bear with me. If you had one area where there was like a really big streak or like a drop of finish that's kind of more globby, kind of think of it like a teardrop running down your skin or something like that, or a sweat bead where you've got a big old glob and it's kind of sitting there. You'll probably need to work that down a little bit, and there's lots of easy ways to do that with wet sanding. I would point you to automotive channels, because fixing paint dribbles like that is very common when you're spraying automotive paint. And so there's lots of people that'll show you how to do that with wet sanding, but it's pretty straightforward. You just wet sand it with progressive sands or progressive grit until it all kind of works out. Here we go. Give it a little circle, give it a little radius, give it a little rotate action. There we go, and then you just kind of smooth it back out. And then not picking up any red, still good. And yeah, this is one of the other benefits of working with a water-based poly, is that since it's water solvent, you can wet sand it and it'll usually... Actually, no, I don't know that I can say that definitively, that, you know, working with a water-based poly, the chemistry works out in such a way that it's easier, or it takes wet sanding better, because wet sanding you can do with nitro and stuff like that too, so it takes water. All right, here's what we're looking for. So you see this kind of milky texture that we're getting? All of those areas are areas where we sanded off some of the top and it leveled off, so that's exactly what we're looking for. Ideally, you could, don't sand through the whole finish, but you could sand it up until this whole front looks like that. But most of the time you don't need to. You just, as long as you're getting a little bit of smokiness to it, that's what we're looking for. And also this body is still drying, so once it dries off, more than likely the most of the top is going to be that. Come around the side, there's a big old paint flake that was just sitting on my thing. on my workbench apparently. Just a little bit of water right there to get it started. Bring that over. Okay. This is one of my favorite parts, is just going around these contours. Just going all the way around. The Olympics started today. Today is February 7th, and my dad and I were just watching the opening ceremonies. It's pretty cool. The Olympics is always a joyous time. Sports has a way of, or sports, if you're in the rest of the English-speaking words or world. I think America, or North America, is one of the only places where we say sports plural, but everybody else is sport. But yeah, sports have a brilliant way of bringing people together, and there's the Hawks Day Olympiad. So there's, around the time of the Olympics, you'll see sometimes there's doves or pictures of doves and white flags and stuff like that to denote that, like, on the Olympic grounds and stuff like that, wars and everything are inconsequential. Well, they're of course consequential because they affect geopolitics and the ability of somebody to be able to participate in the sport. Like, you can't really train for a sport if your home place is in war or your home is a battlefield. But yet some people still do. Some athletes, they brave the troubles and the tumultuous arenas of war, and they still train, and those are always really, really great stories to hear about. You love to hear about an athlete who, worked through, or athletes plural, that worked through hardship of war and famine and stuff like that to be able to compete on the world stage. But in case that's not for the rest of us, for the rest of us mere mortals who don't have to go through those sorts of hardships, then it's nice to have kind of a unifying body or a unifying event where we say, hey, you know what? Let's let our bygones sit on the side for a second and let's just have some fun. Let's compete. And things can get tense. That's not to say that, it's always peaceful at the Olympics. I imagine it would be very tenuous to have two countries that are warring together compete against one another. And sport has always been used as a geopolitical tool. Think about the miracle game where the American teams beat the Soviet Union, and how chess, especially as a chess player, chess was used as a geopolitical tool. Chess is a sport, by the way. It's a sport of a mind, but it is very much a sport in the way that you have to train for it and stuff like that. So yeah, we've certainly used sports as geopolitical tools, but there's always this kind of love of the game and love of the sports around the Olympics, and I love how the Olympics kind of brings people together, and sometimes allows people to work through hardships, either domestic or international, and just come together and compete and do something that you love and you've been doing for your whole life. So that would be my talk on the Olympics. I have a lot of other thoughts on the Olympics as somebody who has done a number of Olympic sports. To be clear, I'm not an Olympic athlete, but I have done enough of the Olympic sports to know how rabid some people can be about training and insisting that their kids or themselves are going to be Olympic athletes, and the kind of things that takes, for better or for worse. But maybe we'll talk about that some other time. That's a little bit of a downer topic. So congratulations to all the athletes who are competing in Milan. Good luck to Team USA and all the teams. I hope you guys, it's literally I just hope both teams have a great time. Like, who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl? And then somebody's like, I just hope both teams have a good time. And that's usually the cop-out for people that don't know a lot about football. But genuinely, I hope that all the teams and all the athletes remain safe, and they have a great time, and they compete, and they bring home the glory for themselves and for their country. So we've got everything Scotch-Brited up, really, really nice. It's looking nice and foggy. From here, we could just immediately put on our next coat of Varathane. So we're going to put down another coat of triple coat. We're going to do that 2 more times, and then once we put down our second triple coat, then we will come back and we will do progressive sanding. So progressive sanding is going to be where it really shines up, and you're going to love it. So Alrighty, home stretch. Here we are, polishing. So, pretty straightforward. You have McGuire's Ultimate Compound. This is the polish that I use. It's a cut and clarity restorer, color and clarity restorer, but think of this kind of like liquid sandpaper or like very, 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 very fine, even finer than 3000 grit liquid sandpaper. So I'm almost out of this stuff, so I'm gonna have to reach in and actually, grab some of it from the bottle. And as far as what we're gonna put that on, this is just a 6-inch buffing wheel. You can do this by hand, just get one of these. I got this at Harbor Freight for a couple bucks. You can find them online. We're just gonna spray our compound onto that. Obviously, I have a automatic buffing wheel here, or automatic buffer, that I'm gonna use to go over it. You can still do this by hand, very therapeutic, kind of like sanding, but because I have to turn around a number of different bodies, I figured I would just invest in the power tool equivalent. So, we're gonna hit a time lapse here in a little bit. This is gonna be the most fun part because you're gonna see everything shine up. We gave the body I gave it overnight, so I sent it up to 3000 grit, and then you just give it about 6 hours or overnight for everything to off gas. I don't think there's much off gassing at this point, but online tutorials that I've found for this process recommend that. So that's what we did. So just give it a couple more hours, 6 hours overnight, whatever you gotta do, and then we can get into it. So I'm gonna get this plugged in. I'm gonna drop some polish on top of it, and we're gonna see if this doesn't shine up.
And that's about it. We have a wrap, and I am very stoked with how everything came out, as I often am. I typically don't send stuff out if I'm not stoked with it, but really, really happy with how the burst came out with the new finish that we're using, bar thing. Very, very pleased with how that came out. I've since shipped the body off to Craig. He's gotten it, and he says it's fantastic. There was a little bit of an issue with the finish with, I think, just some leftover polish, but soapy water to the rescue. Shout outs to Chris Fix and his trademarked soapy water. If you watch any of his videos, great automotive channel to check out. But yeah, a little bit of soapy water I think has since fixed the issue. And I'm super stoked to see how the build shapes up. Which, by the way, a little bit of a shameless plug, every Monday or so, or every couple Mondays, whenever I get build pics in from clients, I do MadLad Monday on Instagram. So if you want to see what the community is building, definitely go check out the Instagram link down in the description. And if you want to get one of these bodies for yourself, then feel free to hit the link, the Reverb store link down in the description below. It should be up by the time that I release this video, but also I am habitually lazy. So if it's not up, feel free to leave a funny comment down below, or just shoot me a message on Reverb and say, hey, I'm looking for the Mythic Red Burst. And I'll be like, I got you, fam. I got you. So that is that. We'll wrap up today's video the normal way, and that's by me saying, always remember, friends, that you are wanted, you are loved, and you are appreciated. You have a special talent that nobody else has, and the world is waiting on you to bring it out. So muster a little courage, go out into the world, and change it. That's what the world's waiting on. You. Till next time, friends, be good to one another, and we'll see you soon. God bless.